Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a good lunch. At least I did. Thanks to our lovely facility for that. Now we go into our afternoon session. In the afternoon session, we have two presentations coming, and then we have a very interesting panel waiting for us. So I hope you are all ready for that. Before we dive into all that, I have just one administrative thing to point out. Please, during the break that we have, please go to the reception desk here and please sign up for the trainings either on Wednesday or Thursday, and please choose a training. And you just have to fill a form for that and just sign up yourself. Then it is easier for us to plan the later stages of this conference. But now it is my pleasure to invite here Mr. Jean-Robert Hontomois from Africa CERT. He's here. Sorry, but what we heard in the morning session from our ministers was that there is a clear willingness on the political level to start and to bring the operational cooperation in cybersecurity between African countries to the next level. So I think we don't have a better person to build on that topic than Jean-Robert. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So, distinguished expert, colleague, excellencies, it is my privilege to address you and to share a part of an ongoing research related to cyber resilience within the African cyber domain. I would like to take this opportunity to express the Africa CERT community's gratitude to His Excellency, Minister Deepak Balgobin, for all the ongoing support received from Mauritius CERT under his leadership and his care. A couple of the discussion of this morning prompted a few items that I would like to highlight. The first thing is an ongoing discussion with the president of an African financial institution with office in 13 African countries. And they made a couple of interesting points that I would like to share with you when they launched new services during the COVID pandemic. One, they had to make an internal governance change to adapt to the new normal, but also prompted their regulators to remove barriers. Second, they have to act on the corporate culture to embrace new way of working. Third, they communicate their vision to their partner, including their technology partners, to make the required architectural improvement. And fourth, they had to work with their IT engineers to face the new challenge. The second story that I would like to share is, in fact, some work with some critical infrastructure providers that prompted to perform some penetration testing during the pandemic. And so the question to everyone is, how do you plan to respond when you see huge supply chain issues within those critical sector operators' software application that they've been using? And how do you coordinate such an issue at large scale? Fourth, and the minister touched that a little bit this morning, and that's also what prompted me to talk a little bit about it. The increased mobile penetration to deliver services prompted a country to launch an initiative to understand mobile threats. It led to a few challenges, and pretty much the question that came from I would say that's an industry-wide or country-wide assessment was, how do you drive basic hygiene campaign with the large population and a part of citizens still using devices that can no longer receive updates? How do you ensure that kids that are connected online follow basic hygiene rules? And how do you instill within your population basic hygiene rule when 30% of those who use the application are not digital literate? The fourth scenario that I would like to share is from a company that runs a network operating in 10 data centers that power business critical applications in 36 African countries. The incident response team has been at work overcoming challenges such as provisioning services and hardware, while most of the data centers in some of the countries were closed. Coordinating various incidents, such as employees leaving the trust network while they have to deal with, deal and handle confidential information, and later returning within the office realm with infected devices after when the work resumed after some stage of the pandemic. And last scenario is how difficult it has been for incident response team to deliver the services in a difficult time, difficult environment, supporting their stakeholders, and how some of them have been thriving to support their communities and delivering various services such as cyber drill and training. So I would like to take you to a research that we have been conducting for a few moments now, especially at the time where the African Telecommunications Union, Smart Africa, and also the African Union are launching digital transformation strategy for to support the Digital Africa initiative, and also are launching a kind of cybersecurity blueprint for Africa with common policy and standard on digital security for network infrastructure. So I will be a little bit provocative during my presentation. So I took the precaution to tell you that the opinion expressed are only mine and not those from any of the organizations that I work with, or even my employer. Okay, so a statement that is driven from Sun Tzu, The Art of War. The competent cyber warrior learn from their mistake, while the cyber master learn from the mistake of others. So the understanding of what I will be talking about is about preparation. And that led me to this statement of President Eisenhower. I heard a long time ago in the Army that there is a very great distinction because when you are planning for an emergency, you must start with this own thing, the very definition of emergency. And that is unexpected. Therefore, it is not going to happen the way you are planning. But if you haven't been planning, you can start to work intelligently at least. That is the reason it is so important to plan, to keep yourself stepped in the character of the problem that you might one day be called upon to solve or to help to solve. And you will see later in my presentation that I will even mention some preparation steps that somebody like the director of F5 Labs, who is also a martial practitioner, took from martial arts and tried to prepare his team's mindset to face the unexpected. So the research that we conducted was followed from the methodology below. We did some literature review, some discussion and experience sharing from internet pioneers, discussion with incident response team, experience from ISP, CCTLD, Internet Exchange Point, and from that company that built an operation in 10 data centers, supported business critical application in 30 African countries. Some of the experience were driven from participating in policy debate since '96, and some input from survival mechanism. So the way I will then present the topic is through lessons learned over the year. And what I want you to think about is your level of preparedness. Have you taken into consideration all the possible scenarios? Usually, what I heard sometimes, or even most often, when people speak about cybersecurity, is a malicious actor targeting the infrastructure, targeting the ability to deliver services, and also criminal actors. But have you think about the whole picture? Maybe, I don't know, maybe the absence of electricity can be something to look at. There may be things to look at within the protocol, within the hardware and software that you are using. And in fact, we will see that there was a level of preparedness that started since '98. Are we learning from that and carry on the experience from those old or past years, but that are still relevant today? So we've heard this morning that nations have an obligation to provide security to their citizens. What about organizations? And this statement came during a policy meeting. In fact, it was a policy advocacy meeting in '96 with government officials and policymakers to remove barriers for satellite connectivities, internet connectivities, and wireless. And what he tried to express to the committee present was, what is our level of preparedness? How do we all work together to ensure that we will be facing unseen risk? And what have you put in place for the whole country, the whole ecosystem, to be ready to deal with those risks when they rise? Organizations have the duty to return value to their stakeholders. We know that. While technology is at the heart of the digital transformation journey. We have heard that this morning. It is undeniable that the increasingly networked, digital, and connected world has enlarged and complicated those obligations. These changes have also created responsibility shared among a variety of stakeholders. What are those stakeholders that also have an interest in cyber? How do we identify them? How do we work with them? How do we ensure that they are prepared and all together we share this collective responsibility? So, this is a kind of overview of the lesson learned over the year. And when this came out from the report, one of my questions to the policy makers and to our leadership is, what should we learn from that? Do you have a record of all those things that happened? What are you putting in place using the lesson learned from the past as foundation for the work that we are doing today? So a couple of things that I would like to mention here. So around the 90s to 2000, there was an increasingly need to work with policymakers for awareness, for policy change, to enable internet and related technologies and activities. There was a common ground discussion for public-private partnership dialogue. As you understand, cross-border data flow was the monopoly of some national telecommunication provider that threatened the development of a couple of infrastructure that was put in place. There was an increasing discussion around control of access and technology adoption, security, encryption. But there was also a need that started early to provide a mass of technical competent people to build those infrastructure, to deliver those services, to provide ICT security in a train-of-trainer way through capacity building and skill building. Today, when we speak about capacity building and when we speak about not enough people to tackle the challenges, do we have in mind that we have to sometimes use train-of-trainer approach to ensure that we pass the knowledge along? And I'm happy to hear this morning that Mauritius is becoming a hub for the region. Don't worry, we will call you often. The need to implement incident response teams start earlier. within North. In fact, most of the engineers were trained in 99. And from 99 through various conferences and events. What happened today with those pool of experts that have been built? Do we include them when we participate at this kind of meeting, when we speak about dialogue across sectors? Common ground for public and private partnership in innovative way, and human network and partnership. I will speak a little bit about that in the next slide. But something happened in '98. So what have you learned from that? So I hope you were aware of the year 2K, where in fact, some president office sent directive across sector to build committees to understand what will happen to various critical sector operators if the infrastructure were not able to move to the year 2000. So that was the first time when we start hearing about national committees discussing security issues, critical infrastructure sector, and national infrastructure protection plan. Sector profile. Is this thing working? Sector profile, sector classification, sector identification, risk registered, standard development and action, research and development, a governance framework for resilience objectives, vulnerability assessment and appropriate investment, information sharing across sectors. From 98, 99 to today, where are we now? And I would like to add also something else. When various entities, organizations, and also stakeholders started putting in place infrastructure to deliver services, there was some discussion about whether importing technology, software from outside, and we have learned from 99. As you know, in 99, a couple of banks realized that they had portion of code that nobody in the country understood because it was written in COBOL, and finding COBOL developers at that time was hard. And they had to go through a different change of mindset to build an ecosystem of people capable for understanding those codes, but also capable of building those applications. But came some technology decisions, such as using open source software. From that came also some reflection around vulnerability equity, technology depth. How do we include all those concepts today into national framework? Then in 2000, we understood, or the pioneer understood, that internet was also an object of geopolitical battle. Do we include that today into our reflection? We've seen with the case of Afrinic and through the establishment of Afrinic, those geopolitical issues rising. With the CCTLDs and with most or almost some of the CCTLDs managed outside the continent that make nations dependent to individuals outside the continent that have nothing to do with the nation that is supposed to manage, or the stakeholders that are supposed to manage the CCTLDs in the country. Do we take those things into consideration today? We learned that BGP protocol DNS can be used as geopolitical tools, either for malicious actors, but also for denying traffic to specific countries. What do we do about them today? That led to the creation or the formation of AFSTAR, the African Organization of Internet Governance, and also the African Government Working Group, hosted by Afrinic. In 2014, a couple of discussions, and in fact, a push to build incident response team to tackle global coordination issue. Reflection around national information security role, notification requirement. Those are accurate issues that you are discussing within the national framework. Technology choice, language barrier, digital literacy, attribution, legal framework. So a couple of frameworks have been put in place. And then in 2020, 2022, the new normal due to the pandemic rise those issues and also many of the issues that you have heard about this morning. So what we find out during this research is that whenever there is a risk event, it will either accelerate, disrupt, broad challenge, or optimize your digital transformation with impact on technology adoption, mobility, services, social interaction, cloud adoption, innovation. And countries or organizations are dealing with those issues through political commitment and intervention, layer 8, 9, through transformation leadership, through policy that remove barrier or new policies, incentives such as economic and others, and social adoption impact. But more importantly, it brought out from discussion with a couple of the people that we interviewed, it brought out a couple of three concepts. They need to be human-centric because at the end, humans are the most critical assets. Humans are those who we are protecting, and humans are those who build infrastructure. So, how do you build your human resource capacity? How do you build your communities and economy? We have heard that this morning. And how do you instill trust within the human, within the network, trustworthiness in a partnership model? The second is about process, right? How you participate in global cyber norm development, adhere to global and open standard, promote smart policies and regulation, and carry out joint operation with colleagues. How do you build institutions to preserve the effort for experience sharing? And I will just talk about a concept later that is experience sharing 2.0. Reflect on interoperability for cross-border trust framework, privacy and data protection, define aspiration, priorities, and identify funding mechanisms and how to fund your priorities. And it also brings the concept of building robust and scalable network, infrastructure, and services. So, what we have found from those who build those infrastructure, what they have told us is that there is a need at the infrastructure level to have a security strategy with the human and skill workforce development at the center, then focus on the fundamental. Build integrated portfolio that enable orchestration, preparation, response, and detection. So here, you see the word preparation. It used to be prevention, but deliberately, I have changed that to preparation, and you will see why. So a couple of pillars, and I will go very quickly on that because we don't have enough time, but I will leave the presentation. So a couple of pillars that those people that we interview suggested to look at for preparation is to focus on people training, awareness-raising activities. Basically, they outline that it is important to understand what normality is for your environment. Then to understand when you get into stress situation. And then to understand when you get into crisis. And what are the resources that you can pour out from internal, but also from your partnership network, and what are the level of investment required to be in that state of readiness. In the protect phase, again, I will try to be brief. What they mentioned was also related to people, process, and technology. In the detection phase, same thing, to hone your detection capabilities, to ensure timely response, people, process, and technology. And then you have the last two phases, the phase of response, where I will spend a little bit time. What response organization do you have in your ecosystem? What are the incident response teams? How do they cooperate together? Do you have a way to coordinate, for example, with unusual stakeholders like the technology developers? I will mention that a little bit. What are your different plans, your response plan, your crisis management plan? Do you use playbook? What kind of training do you take your teams through? How strong and effective are your trust network and your stakeholder collaboration? How do you communicate across your various stakeholders and within your ecosystem? How do you include the lessons learned? And then action on people and process. And the fifth pillar is the recovery pillar. Again, it deals with people, process, and technology to be prepared. How do you develop and implement the appropriate system and plan to restore data and service that might be impacted during a cyber attack? So it gives us a quick overview. 5? 3, okay. It gives us a quick overview of the continent. So wherever you use the framework provided by the GFCE, ITU, Oxford, Cyber Readiness Index, and etc., you have a couple of outlines that you can follow. So I will not mention that. But what is alarming for me is the state of readiness of the continent. At this time, we only have 21 national CSIRT, only 19 cyber strategy developed. Within the service provider community, we have only one known CSIRT. There are probably a lot of them that are not known. 13 manuals adoption for global routing, incident response management, and that are following best current operational practice. Within the business sector, we know only 3 private CSIRT, 2 CSIRT in the banking sector, and a collaboration through the SWIFT network. How do we build a cross-sector collaboration with those entities? And there are surely other capacities that are out there. How do we identify them, and how do we build collaboration with them for a global understanding of what is happening in the continent? Within Afrinic, there are still work to do. Only 1,800 members have abuse contact lacking. What do we do about them? What do we do about technology and protocol adoption, such as IPv6? There are about 645 technology hubs, and they are called the African technology makers. What are they doing about application security, product security, vulnerability identification, and vulnerability disclosure? How do we engage with them? And how do we work together with them within our national framework, but also at the global level within the African network? What are we doing with the name registry, with various security research groups and security communities? And how do we include them within our national framework? So there is a need of a paradigm change, quickly in 2 minutes. My understanding from that research is that cybersecurity is about risk understanding, risk measurement, risk management, prediction, about being able to understand the risk and being able to fail safe, has a focus on technology. However, from, again, the research, the conclusion that I can draw is that cyber resilience is human-centric, is to be able to be prepared to manage the unexpected. It's about mindset and preparation. It is about keep doing, failing, coming back, doing again, honing the problem-solving skill, and being able to identify and take advantage of quick wins. So it comes back to a growing mindset. And I have put a link there from a couple of practitioners that take their teams and explain how they took their teams through that transition to cyber resiliencies. And then very quick, so I think the blueprint that we all have to think about comes in a couple of phases. One, a governance framework through strategy, where we want to see a couple of components: threat assessment, action plan with concrete objectives and activities to address the threat, calendar and resources, including financial allocation. Some national cybersecurity strategy don't have those components. Being able to define management role and responsibility, have a culture risk awareness culture, have a cyber risk awareness culture. Being able to adopt architecture and standard and also legal compliance, and being able to build a cybersecurity workplace. The second item that I think is important for a cyber resilient framework is the approach to risk management, testing, incident response, and recovery. How information security control and testing are implemented. Are they mapped to assets? How response and recovery testing and exercise are done. Are we doing exercise such as the Cyber4Devb that we organize to put people into a learning state, or are we just injecting scenario that doesn't teach them the ability to be in an alertness state to be able to respond? What are the metrics that we are using to drive the different programs that we are putting in place? What is our form of communication and information sharing? And what is our relationship with third parties? And what are those third parties? So quickly, a couple of dimensions that I think is important and also that came up from the research. Being able to instill a sense of dynamism within the ecosystem, looking at the way we network with different organizations, understanding organization dependencies, partnership model, and what I call information sharing 2.0, that is moving to sharing best practice, sharing know-how, being able to conduct joint operations together for being in a state of awareness, and also being able to reach out, to pull up resources, to pull up knowledge from the partnership network when it is needed. How do we practice skill building? What do we use as playbook? What are the exercises? Do we test our policy? How do we build our muscular memory? And what are the survival strategies that we instill within our teams? And then the adaptability, how lessons learned post-mortem are integrated to the daily learning curve. And again, what are the resources that we pull, and what is the return of investment? How do we measure that? Then that will be the last thing that I would like to talk about for final. It is also to make sure that our teams and our organization are aware of the decision-making bias, and that they are prepared, and that they integrate that in their day-to-day preparation, their day-to-day activities, their understanding of threat, their understanding of crisis, and the way they respond to those different events that happen within their digital transformation journey. So I will stop here for the matter of time. There are a couple of other information, but I think the presentation will share, so you will be able to find that. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Jean-Robert. Before our next speaker gets up here, just a couple of administrative notes more. Firstly, as you have all understood already, that we are way behind our planned schedule. So these two presentations that we had planned in between these panels now in the afternoon session will be done tomorrow. And we will basically have now, after this presentation, now 2 more panels today. And our advice, in order to stay still on the agenda and to give you enough time before the dinner, our advice is for you to pick up coffee during the sessions so that we are not making a separate coffee break this afternoon. But as you have all seen in the agenda, we have now a strong focus on the question of cyber resilience and maturity of different nations, be it in Africa or anywhere else generally as well. What we know here is actually on a study on exactly, especially on this question, and I'm really glad to welcome here Dr. Laban Bagui from, I think you are based in South Africa, right?
Yes.
So he has something to tell us in this regard, and this presentation now actually plays very well into the panel discussions that we have later on. So, Laban, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, and thank you for having me this afternoon. I'm not sure I will be knowing how to manipulate this. Oh, okay. And where do I get the light? Okay, great. I think it will be fine. Yeah, so just like he just introduced me, I'm Laban Bagui, and I'm with the C3SA, the Cybersecurity Capacity Center for Southern Africa. And I will try to give you a little bit of our report on the cybersecurity capacity of the SADC region as we saw it through our work of research. So that's basically what we're going to be talking about, building cyber resilience in the SADC, how it could work if we manage to deal with a few issues that we might be finding along the way. So this is the table of contents, and this is what C3SA is. C3SA is a consortium of three main type of organizations. Of course, you have the University of Cape Town, you have the GCSCC of Oxford, London, and you do have Research ICT Africa, which are coming together to form the C3SA and be able to create that capability item there at UCT, an institution center. So, right. I will try to go a bit quickly, just a bit, but I'm sure we are going to be able to find a way to stop. Okay. Yeah, how does it work? Should I turn around a little bit or just look at it this way? So basically, at a glance, you will see that there are things that are being done by many countries and, of course, the SADC Secretariat and all the member states of the SADC regarding cybersecurity. There is a vision that includes ICTs and, of course, the securitization of these ICTs. And there are a few things that were put in place. And amongst the many countries, let's say 16 countries of the SADC, many of them have already started doing some interesting work because they have, 6 of them have published their cybersecurity strategies. Others are talking about working on it. I think they've been doing it for a few years. So soon, probably this year or next year, we'll have many more countries with cybersecurity strategies in place. The same goes with the development of infrastructure, like Jean-Robert was just talking about now. And it is growing, but not at the pace that we would want it to grow. Of course, there is the very particular item of internet penetration, which is growing. There are various numbers, 35, 30%, 40% going around. Let's say we wait for the next censuses to know how it's going. In some countries, it's very high. In others, it's not that high. So in the whole region, it should vary around 30%. But what it tells you is many more people are getting involved with the internet. They are buying, they are selling, they are having entertainment, And every time they are doing it, they are exposing themselves to all kinds of situations, we say all kinds of threats and risks. But the question would be, do they all know about the type of threats and the type of risks that they are exposing themselves to every time they go on their favorite platforms to buy some shares, to mobile money, banking, sending some messages to loved ones, and etc. So the whole thing is, it seems it might be that they don't properly know. That's just for people. And when it comes to institutions and even companies, even though companies, let's say businesses, the private sector is doing much better than the public one when it comes to these things. But even then, they still, it looks like it's either they don't know or they don't push for a prioritization of things in such a way that they will be more secure in their dealings, especially when they are working through their supply chains. The things that they have to sell out, the things that they are buying from others, and who is selling to them, and the kind of things that are happening in the mix of it all. Making sure that standards are going through, making sure that the right people are not moving information in the wrong places in such a way that, well, like they say, it's information leaks. So we also have the growing cybercrime. It's one of the things that are becoming interesting. It used to be that, okay, you will hear about it in the news. It was interesting to hear that someone was defrauded, and now we know someone who was defrauded, so it's no longer in the news. And the fraudster is no longer someone from another country. It is someone that is close by. He's arrested by the police. We can see him on TV. He's someone you might even know. So these things are so close to us now that we are talking about them almost as if we know them, even though we are getting into knowing them better. So before I get to talk about the report, just to tell you about the main framework that we use for this report and also for the work that we do at C2SA, because what we do most of the time is to assess the cybersecurity capacity of countries. So what we do use this particular framework, the cybersecurity capability, maturity model for nations. It's a long name. From time to time, I remove capability and I place capacity, and then vice versa. So nobody will be blamed if they have some trouble with that long name, but it works. So this particular framework try to look into a country's implementation of things like a cybersecurity strategy, a national cybersecurity strategy, and of course policies that are attached to it. Then how the culture of cybersecurity is in a particular country. Then the development of skills and competencies regarding cybersecurity. And after that, we look at regulations, regulatory frameworks, the kind of laws that are there, if the courts are ready to deal with cybersecurity matters, particularly cybercrime issues, and of course the place of collaboration when it comes to that. But the fifth dimension, it is all about standards and the kind of organization which is developed to handle cybersecurity issues. So that's what we used in this particular study. For every dimension is made up of factors, and for every factor you have various aspects. So that's usually how the structure is designed in order to get to some understanding of a particular dimension in a country or within a region, as we did this time. Of course, once a particular aspect is being investigated, we try to determine whether in that particular aspect a country is at a startup stage or they are already at a dynamic stage. Of course, dynamic countries are not so many. I don't think there is any. But there are countries that are already at a strategic level with some aspect of implementation of their cybersecurity, which are at a dynamic level. There are very few. When it comes to Africa, you may imagine that most of what we do is between a startup stage and an established stage. A few countries, especially in SADC, a few countries, I'm not going to name them, but there are less than 5 who can get some of the aspects or factors in some dimensions going up to a strategic stage. All right, so that's how we, let's say, frame the whole study. But the methodology itself was a mixed method deductive study, which was based on a desktop study, so a lot of document review, which then were grounded by, let's say, a few in-depth interviews and some semi-structured interviews of responsible people representing some sort of nexus of knowledge and understanding of cybersecurity within the region. So we went to them, spoke to them, and then ran a thematic analysis of what they said and whatever that is in the documents, in the news, in, let's say, academic literature, to the point where we were able to get to let's say, an interesting conclusion of what is going on in SADC and in SADC member states. So this is a very broad summary of things where you have those yellow, green, blue lines and gray lines. So the SADC is the blue line, and the green line is the rest of Africa, while the yellow line is meant for a general view of the rest of the world. So, and of course, the dimensions are represented there, and they allow this particular graphic allows you to see where the SADC is doing well and where it is not compared to Africa, the rest of Africa, and compared to the rest of the world. You can see that when it comes to something called legal and regulatory regulatory frameworks, the SADC is behind everybody else, meaning even though many regulations are, let's say, in the journey to become regulations, they are not there yet. Most countries do not have cybersecurity dedicated regulations. And it is a particular issue. Like a lawyer was letting us know, it is a crime if there is something that says it is a crime. So before it is defined as a crime, anything that is done is not easy to be called a crime. Then it will need a precedent for it to become one. So the SADC is lagging behind in terms of regulatory frameworks and in terms of knowledge and capability, basically skills and competencies, and in terms of cybersecurity awareness. So it's lagging behind. The rest of Africa is lagging behind the rest of the world. And these are very problematic things. We talk about it when the other graphic, I will show the other graphic. But when it comes to policy and strategy, so national strategies are coming on at the same pace as the rest of Africa. The culture is getting there. It's the same pace as the rest of Africa. However, there is still not a particular prioritization of cybersecurity, especially in decision-making policy spheres where, for many reasons, I suppose very legitimate reasons, we have not had, for many countries in Africa, major cybersecurity cyber attacks in such a way that it doesn't represent an immediate threat or problem that you have to be solving with all your resources. Otherwise, you will get in terrible trouble. Of course, when it comes to standards and technology, the SADC is ahead of the rest of Africa, but still lagging a little bit behind the rest of the world. The SADC is, at this point, the largest group when it comes to African regional groups. And you have a very large, not so large, a very broad variety of things that are going on. You have countries that are very, very emerging. When I say emerging, I don't want to use the word poor, but they're having a lot of challenges. And you have countries that are, let's say, in a better shape, and they are all in that same environment. So they have very different type of priorities, very different things that they might find important for them. So that might explain why they wouldn't invest or push particular agendas, considering cybersecurity as one of them. Okay, this slide is just saying a little bit of what I was saying now, but it is written in words. So I will just move to the next one to start talking about what we have found when we were doing this particular study. I'm sure since you are practitioners, you might recognize a few things. So what I try to do is to circle particular areas where certain things need to be, I won't say addressed, but they need to be concerning. So the way this particular graphic is designed, so I should start by trying to explain how it is designed. What you have as numbers are the numbers of countries. So if you, where is that green thing? Okay, let me come back. I didn't press the right one. So the green thing. Okay. So when you see a number like this one, 6 or 2, these are the number of countries within the SADC which have done something at that color level. The color level here, for instance, at this 6, is formative. When it gets redder, then it gets established and strategic for one particular country, only one, here for this particular aspect of this dimension. So you will see that I circle this particular area here. That pointer is not very visible, but you can see the area, where you can see a large number of countries, 10, 11, 12, 13, and so on, signifying that in that particular area, the rest of the SADC countries are not that pulling back down, but they are all starting up in things like organizing themselves for cybersecurity, integration of cybersecurity in crisis management, identification of events, regulatory requirements. These countries, because they are in this situation, they make it very difficult even for collaborations in terms of information sharing. So while those who are at the top there, the green thing, these countries here, which are a few, they can be 4, 5, 3 countries, while they can have conversations about specific threats, the other countries will not be at that level of conversation. And that's a problem, because the moment they get in trouble, they are a little bit in panic because not everyone knows what to do, what is happening, how to help them, and the others are not aware. So there is a lot of problem that is happening here. And this is just to talk about setting up, when I say just, not really a simple thing, but to put in place a strategy, a national cybersecurity strategy, and devising a policy or a set of policies just to be able to handle cybersecurity events and cybersecurity issues. Of course, you will also have a note at this red one here, because this particular area, defense and security, is not much taken up. So basically, the entire SADC is starting up when it comes to cybersecurity defense force, or let's say civil defense coordination in terms of cybersecurity. So it has not taken up yet. The minister was talking earlier about diplomacy and the issues that could arise in case, for instance, a state or a non-state actor decides to act upon a particular country. Most countries in SADC are not prepared yet, not yet prepared to do anything about that if it ever happened. And plans and strategies are also not in place. If there are, let's say, because we have heard about people talking about drafts and memos and discussions in ministries, at our level, as long as it is not published or we cannot even see the draft, we cannot say this thing does exist. So some countries might be getting very close to having a better, let's say, preparation, let's say, in terms of defense. Yeah, this microphone. But not all. So talking about cybersecurity culture and society. You're also going to have, okay, I'm just going to talk about this red circle here, where you have most countries of the SADC. So it's the cybersecurity practice, skills, issues with information and disinformation, and user trust in e-commerce services. So what this particular set of aspects tells you is that when it comes to the SADC, the public, the culture for general members of the public in terms of cybersecurity is very bad. It is at a startup level for most, let's say, 2/3 of these countries, and at a formative and established level for a very few number of countries. But basically, the public in SADC is not really very much ready when it comes to cybersecurity matters. People hear stories, but they are not prepared to do anything, or they are not doing much when it comes to fending themselves and getting away when anything happens. So this is an area that needs to be looked at very much. So I wanted to point at this, where you have an increasing number of things happening, where awareness of risks and priority of security is moving amongst the executives, not so much in the general public, but it is moving among the executives. They are the one pushing these numbers there, but then you have 7 countries and 8 countries still starting off, while 8 countries are half-half, are getting there a little bit. When I say formative will tell you that they are not, that they have a better understanding. They are going towards an important prioritization, but it's not there yet. So basically, it is progress, but it needs more in order to become much more useful for countries to be able to react if anything of a particular scale happens. So for a D3 is all about, cybersecurity knowledge and capabilities. You will see that most countries are not doing well in the entire SADC, to the exception of 2 or 3 of them. All the other countries are having serious problems here. There is a lack of skilled professionals, skills cybersecurity professionals in every one of South Africa, that is sub-Saharan African and SADC countries. There's a problem when it comes to programs themselves at university, because they are barely starting to emerge now, that you get undergraduates and graduates program dealing specifically on cybersecurity. It is just starting up, like this particular graphic points out. The problem here is that it is saying we have a massive gap in cybersecurity knowledge. When I say massive gap, it is something not just to talk about, it has to become a priority, something we have to solve. Some people suggested that the moment you finish training people, then they move somewhere else and you don't have them anymore. The brain circulation issue can be brought forward. Still, we don't produce enough cybersecurity professionals and experts to be able to respond to the needs that we have. Next one. Yeah. Talking about legal and regulatory frameworks, I think I tried to point out in the beginning with the comparison with the rest of Africa and with the rest of the world. There are very striking disparities. So at first, of course, the usual 1, 2, and 3, the very same countries. I'm not going to name them, but I suppose they might be naming, let's say, knowing themselves. But they tend to be on top there, and they tend to be either formative or established or strategic, depending on the aspect and on the factor where they are represented. When it comes to legal frameworks, they are already up there, but most countries are not there. There is this particular round here that I wanted to mention particularly, yeah, where procedure in cybercrime and human rights impact, so the question of balancing securitization and erosion of rights. So the more security you put in place, the more possibility to start doing things that you might not think was the plan at first. So once you establish a very strong cert, it means you have a very strong hold on your network and on your system, and you can ask yourself the next question. So these people are causing trouble. Can we just shut down whatever they are doing on this particular application and forget about what else that could happen from there because they wouldn't be able to do anything? You get that capability the moment you have a strong response to cybersecurity issues. So you find yourself with these two major issues happening in the implementation of the regulations that were put in place, and of course in the potential danger of having so much capability, and in the case someone that does not have, let's say, wanting everybody to express their lives the way they want them, so you might be tempted and do some strange things. However, also we have this other area, law enforcement, prosecution, courts, regulatory bodies, where almost two-thirds, so of countries in the SADC are having problems. Basically, you have to train the courts, the judges, the police. You have to man them, you have to give them more money, vehicles, and make sure you have forensic labs, and all of that, and they are a bit expensive, and it's difficult to get there. The result is, even when you want to collaborate, you will find that the other country did not even collect the data, the evidence that will be helpful in court or to be able to do anything. And that is an issue in many events that happened. So let me move to the last. Okay, not sure what happened now. It's back. Yeah, that's the one. So talking about cybersecurity standards and technologies, there are various aspects here where you have problems. Of course, the first area is the area of standards themselves and standard of procurement and for the provision of products and services. So this is the type of product that we purchase. How secure are they? Are they responding to particular best practices and well-known standards that are internationally known, and the one that were devised in countries? So for standards themselves, many countries have not developed or adopted specific, not say specific, can be industry-specific standards and norms, which would be useful for them then to say we would accept this within our borders and not that, which could prevent importing, let's say, malicious or devices with malicious on the things in there. You have a particular set of routers, and suddenly you find out that something was added because you were not able, for instance, to check for the compliance of the device we're purchasing to the standards, your local standards. The other part that I wanted to look in here, like I suppose the green dot appears, where you have most SADC countries having a problem, is you have the production of technology and a market for cybersecurity products and services within the region. So basically, there are very few, very, very little happening. And you can see with what also was an issue for us is that we were having some trouble finding data for a few countries regarding these particular items. What it tells us is that we are not making cybersecurity technology for ourselves or to be able to provide it to the rest of the world. We are not doing that yet. We don't have a market for that. We don't have insurances, for instance, for that. Very few insurance companies are offering cybersecurity risk type of insurance. So we find ourselves in these kind of issues. And of course, the more we have that, that means our security, our cyber security is very much not in the right place. However, the good note here, so the technology security controls, some of them, I think, depending on a few things, because within the SADC, there are 2 or 3, 4 countries that have a very strong private sector in the financial sector. They are also working in the cybersecurity sector. And they push for the implementation of particular standards. And for the countries that have put in place standards, they have compliance office, I think they call it information officer, something that makes sure that cybersecurity is properly implemented. The privacy of customers or users is also taken care of. So these are things that are happening, and these countries in the particular type of purple are almost, let's say they are at the formative level, to the exception of the 1 year, which is at an established level. Yes, I'm at the end. Thank you. So basically a few recommendations. So if you can read them, then I will not have to read them aloud. But main idea there is what countries should do for themselves and what the collaboration should be, the type of collaboration that should be established between the SADC countries. Basically, it would be nice if the SADC Secretariat could talk to the rest of SADC member states so that they will be able to put in place a sort of networked understanding of how they are going to act, and then they go together and they share information about what is going on here and there, and they support each other when it comes to building the capacity, building institutions and organizations that will be supporting cybersecurity in the region and in every one of these countries. So I think these are the people who are working on that. And you can find the report itself on Sibyl. I suppose we all know about the Sibyl portal. And of course, I'm not sure if you can see it, but you can also find the report on UCT repository. So that's the link that is there, but because of the chairs, I'm not sure you can see it. But if you can, then that's great. So thank you very much for listening.
You can take a seat now for the panel.
Oh, great.
So can I invite here now the participants, speakers, to the next panel that we have. Can I invite here CTO of Mauritius Ministry of Information Technology, Communication and Innovation, Mr. Rajneesh Hawabhai. Welcome. Can I invite here Mrs. Merle Maigre from Estonia, from e-Governance Academy. And our last distinguished member of this panel is going to be Mr. Andy Chadwick from Foreign and Commonwealth Office of UK, based in Nairobi, especially responsible for cybersecurity questions in this region. So thank you all for joining for this panel, and I'm sorry on behalf of the organizers of this conference that we are a little bit behind the schedule, so we didn't get to do the break as we envisaged. So I will just go straight on and ask the question that is in the title of this panel. So what does this nation that you can call cyber resilient actually look like? And I will start with the hosts of this conference. Rajneesh, your minister was early on, he was really proud of the fact that the good place that Mauritius has in these different indexes in cybersecurity. So, but can you call your nation currently cyber resilient, or what are the steps that you have to take in order to get there?
Thank you, Hannes. Let me first thank the organizers for giving the opportunity for us to intervene. I think cyber resilience for a nation is a concept which is much of a journey. It's not a destination. It's not something that you are there and you say, yeah, you're cyber resilient and nothing will happen to you. I think this is a false concept. Cyber resilience is a journey, and you need to engage quickly on it and start to do the long march. Now, where does Mauritius find itself on this journey? I think what we have done a lot is about awareness. So I think cyber resilience depends on, first of all, doing awareness in cybersecurity. I think a lot of work is being done in government through ITSU, the IT security unit, in terms of awareness of cybersecurity issues in government, phishing and all these concepts, so that civil servants do not just push buttons and then we get in trouble. CERT MU also is doing it. They're doing it whenever they're called at organizations, so this is also important. This is one aspect. A second aspect of cyber resilience is to have a very strong governance through laws. And I think this is what you've been pointing out in your study. And the laws, and here our law now is the latest cybersecurity, the one that we've just voted last year, which is the Cybersecurity and Cybercrime Act, ensures compliance with the Malabo Convention and also with the Budapest Convention. So we are taking in the best practices in the world and incorporating in our act. And as has been said, the offenses are mentioned there. So when they exist, they're offenses. When they do not, they're not. So this is a major, and the list has expanded considerably from the Computer Misuse and Cybercrime Act we had before. So we've got a very strong law in place. We are also investing a lot in terms of the prosecution part, in terms of the law enforcement people and the judiciary. And here we are thankful to the Council of Europe with the GLACI Plus project, the GLACI and GLACI Plus project, where we have been able to capacitate our law enforcement people, as well as the police, as well as the judiciary, in terms of how to prosecute cases. So a lot of work is being done in that aspect. A lot of work is being done in that aspect, and that also is much about cyber resilience. So this is an important aspect that has to be looked into. So when we have all this and we look at all these issues, and then I would say in terms of solutions, right? In terms of solutions, whether it is in government. So in government, for example, we have adopted the ISO 27001 standard for government. Yes, we have adopted the ISO 27001 standard in government. So meaning that the controls of the ISO standard are to be followed in government operations, and ITSU does a good work on that aspect. And through that, they also advise in terms of building solutions. So a lot of work is being done in that aspect so that we are ensuring that our solutions incorporate the best practices. So this is also an aspect. When you're running solutions, you're giving service to citizens, you should ensure that your solutions are robust. And again, in the private sector also, they're looking at this aspect. And then, just to before ending, I have two more things. I think now when we put all this together, and now we are coming into the next stage, which is to get everybody around the table, which is the National Cybersecurity Committee, which is established by the Cybersecurity and Cybercrime Act, is another aspect that is going to give us a level of resilience we didn't have. Because then all the parties would come together to discuss about issues. And this committee is being constituted. I hear that we are at the last stage of it. So you say strategic, we should be at the strategic stage at this point in time in terms of setting up this committee. But what is also important in this committee is once the committee comes up, the critical sectors will be labeled as such. Organizations, for example, the utilities sector, the CEB, which is the power company, or the water company, the CWA, all of them will be now part of the critical sectors and many others, but the critical sectors will be defined precisely, and they would have a mandate to report to the National Cybersecurity Committee and the CERT-MU about whatever is happening. So as I can see as we are building up. And also, I don't know how many countries have it, but we've added one concept, which is about auditing. So IT security audits must be conducted by critical sector companies every year. So this is a concept, I don't know how many countries have it, but this is a concept we have adopted. And that report will go to the Cybersecurity Committee, which obviously will rely on CERT-MU's expertise to give us a feedback in terms of whether we are on the right track, the company is doing well, or there are some measures to be taken. But this is an annual thing, and whenever a critical sector organization changes its IT system, or a major change in IT system, or builds a new IT system, it must report in terms of an audit. So as I can see that we are firmly on the march, firmly on the journey, and we are picking up a lot of new pointers and trackers to help us to consolidate our position. So we are definitely on the road for cyber resilience.
Thank you. And I think it was really good to start with such a inspiring prediction. Andy, you are based in Nairobi, and you have a perspective of a country that is probably also quite cyber resilient. So what can you add to the points made by Rajneesh?
Yeah, so, completely agree. This is definitely a journey. It's about, the holistic view and measuring the maturity of resilience. I think some of the points touched on definitely concur with, the strategy, the policies, the definitions, particularly on critical national infrastructure. I think the awareness and the knowledge sharing, both, within the professional cybersecurity area, within sort of educational areas, within, wider society, the cyber awareness is really important. Legislation, very important, the legislative work, particularly with regard to, acting on those laws and with law enforcement and cybercrime. And I think, one area that's not been touched on so far is the technology and the standards, which, it depends what you mean by cyber resilience. If you're talking about cyber security resilience, I think something that across the continent, if I see a gap anywhere, we have a lot of investment across Africa. We put a lot of money into strategy, into awareness, into legislation, with judiciary and with prosecution authorities and so on. But one area is the real basics of cybersecurity. So I'm talking about the cybersecurity frameworks, things like 10 steps to cybersecurity, actually protecting your data and your networks. I think those technologies and standards and controls and measures is something that we shouldn't take our eye off. Quite often at conferences and webinars and so on, you'll hear people say this used to be a technical problem, it's now more of a global problem, more of a diplomatic problem, but it is still a technical problem. It's your data in your network that's going to be hacked. When you have an attack on your business, your enterprise, your government, and you go into the office one morning, and the screen is blank, and it's like, okay, it's your data and your networks that need to be protected. So I think from my point of view, what's close to my heart is let's not forget the technical bit. Let's not forget doing the basics, the 10 steps to cybersecurity, backing up your data, making sure that your software updates are done. The real basic stuff is really important too. But this is very much a holistic, journey. And I think this is where the Oxford CMM model, amongst others, is really useful. You look at those 5 dimensions, of the, you've got the strategy, you've got the society, you've got the knowledge transfer, you've got the legal frameworks, and you have the technology and standards. So, that's my perspective, looking at it, a continental view.
Thank you very much. Before we continue with those thoughts in mind, I will just give you a thing to think about when we go back, is that when you tell to any politician, at least in Europe, then when you tell them that, this thing called cyber is a journey, and you have to invest more and more money every year, then either they think that you are not serious about it, or they lose attention. So it's so how do we handle this challenge? So this is one thing that we can discuss a bit later. But now I will turn to Merle. In your position in e-Governance Academy in Estonia, you have probably a much wider picture on different countries than just this region, So how would you answer this question on how does a cyber resilient nation look like globally?
Right. Well, thank you very much, Hannes, for having me as part of this panel. Really excited and really humbled to add my 2 cents into this discussion. Indeed, our thinking from the e-Governance Academy of Estonia is currently formed by experience of sharing or adding or supporting the cybersecurity and cyber resilience capacity building in areas such as the Western Balkans, in areas such as the Eastern Partnership countries. But ultimately, I think the blocks do not differ that much. In addition, and thereby, I mean, we are all talking about the same aspect, and I think in addition to the CMM model put forward in the study here, the e-Governance Academy has an additional national cybersecurity index that has been created and managed by the e-Governance Academy since 2016. And the approach is generally the same. It starts from the political side, so there's the cyber governance and institutional framework, and I'm intrigued to answer the latter part of your question because I've given it a lot of thought lately, but I can save that to the second round. So there is institutional framework and governance, and I'll just say that I believe that in addition to has been said before to the importance of the clear responsibility, clear institutions appointed, to the importance of having an interagency working group existing, but also in addition to interagency working group, to have a sort of format that includes the private sector, so a public-private partnership format in a country. It is, but ultimately for me, and especially from my recent experience that I've had, under this institutional framework, the key is to have a political will. And the key indeed is to have the politicians to understand why it is important to invest in cybersecurity. And if I can add to the metaphor here, then while I'll agree that it is not a destiny, but it is a journey, I would also use the metaphor of a tree, so resilience as something about growing. And I think it's important to, when talking to the politicians and when talking to them about the importance of cybersecurity investments, rather than telling them that it is a cost, it is important to try to switch their narrative into seeing it as a sort of like a gardening, where you need to put investments in so that it can bear better fruits later. It is important to have politicians see cybersecurity as the other side of the coin of digitization, provided they see some use in digitization. Many of them do. So that to see that these two things go together, and you cannot have a successful digitalization which can bring you votes as a politician without investing into the digital security. But in addition to the political and institutional framework building block, I would also see the importance of the legislative framework as being said. Thirdly, the cyber risk management, incident response, and CSIRT capacity. I think that's very important, to have some sort of like clear responsibilities for those CERT that would go about proactive services and reactive services. Fourthly, the critical information infrastructure protection, then awareness raising and education, and last but not least also fight against cybercrime, so police and cyber police capacity.
Thank you very much. Especially I liked the point that was already mentioned in the earlier presentations as well, the human aspect of this, which also goes to the strategic level. But Laban, I think you, at least it seemed to me that you painted rather a gloomy picture from this region. So you have heard maybe some of the formulas that we can use in order to tackle this challenge. So do you agree with these formulas that you have heard?
In a way, yes. Okay, it's working. Yeah, in a way, I agree with what they have said, what the panelists have said. There is a strong need, for instance, to focus on the technical part, and the way Mauritius is doing is very much so towards achieving a very important resilience, because I suppose it is a journey, and it is not a journey in only one direction, it's a journey in multiple directions because of the nature of the whole cyberspace, where as time goes by, things even become, like someone was saying, the moment we are going to see AI becoming conscious, we will have another problem. So as things go by, things are changing, more and more aspects of our lives are involved into the cyberspace, and so the journey will not be only on one direction, but in so many of them. The human-centric part of it is, it starts with the human and, of course, ends with the human. So definitely, the strongest, they say, the human in that whole system, the more resilient a particular country would be. Basically meaning people are aware of the standards, people are aware of the risk and the threats, people are aware of how to handle themselves and all of that. And when it comes to intervening in response, the people that are there have the capacity to do so. So it's very much, it's really centric, that the human capacity, the human in the cyber security, be strengthened and empowered more than ever before, because the human will be much more able to respond to the changes. The software can do a lot, but when it gets particularly messy, human being will have something to do at that time. Yeah, that's what I can say about it. Thanks.
But do you agree with this garden metaphor that, like how, but I think in your earlier presentation, you sort of tried to lead us to a direction to show that there is a point where some things are good in these countries, and then currently there are certain gaps. So can we really use this gardening metaphor in order to get political attention?
For political attention, I don't know. Unless the politicians then would be gardeners, then they will have an understanding of it. But even with the gardening metaphor, if you plant a seed, it has to be in the right soil. You have to water it, maybe add some fertilizer, and hopefully it will rain. And when it rains, you don't want it to be a flood, because it holds. So the metaphor holds. If I use the same metaphor and look at SADC, for instance, you will see that maybe the SADC does not have something to protect against the floods, or something to protect or to feed the seed. So the seed is planted, but the soil is not that good. A lot of elements are missing, so the plant is not growing. So we are not reaping the fruit, and we are still surprised that we have no tree coming out of the ground, but the things that have to be in there are not there yet. And in the report, we were trying to show that there are things that are not there, but there are things that we need to address very quickly, at least to be at a point where the seed that is planted, meaning we are all agreeing that this is an issue, we have to deal with it. We are starting to move our minds towards dealing with it. But how do we go about making it happen? How much have we done so that it will be able to create what we want to see? And then that's where you find the gaps. Not enough people have the skills. The regulations are there, but nobody can apply them because the courts are not trained, et cetera, et cetera. So you have all of that happening. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So back to you, Rajneesh, about Mauritius. I think earlier on you said that you are well on track in becoming, should we call it cyber resilient Mauritius, or you are well on this track. So I assume that you don't get this challenge in getting your investments into cybersecurity approved by the politicians, or do you?
We do, as anybody else. Money is very short, and we are living through very difficult times with the COVID, and now with the rising prices of commodities and fuel. So the situation is very difficult at regional level, global level, and even national level. So the challenges are there. We are currently in the budget process, and we want to get the SOC going and having a stronger capacity there. So we're getting challenges to get the money. So it's a difficult situation. And precisely if we look at resources, whether in government we're looking at resources, whether it is at ITSU level or whether it's at CERT level, it's very difficult to get resources because the situation is difficult. I think this is a problem that does not touch us alone. If I take the SADC member states, you were mentioning about a gloomy picture. I think it's gloomy just because the situation is difficult. And the priorities, every country has other priorities, look after the people's well-being, well, we need now to balance all this. And that is why maybe this is where we need support. And it could be a program or a support, a Cyber4D, looking for another program where it could look after helping us to harmonize our legislations, so that we can come with concepts like those national committees, which are very public-private partnership, look at the technologies that we need, maybe support us and train us. So I think now that this is an opportunity for us to revisit the program of the Cyber4D and come up with another program which is more Cyber4D plus support. Right? So trying to find what can be done now to take us to the next level, because it's good to assess where we are, but it's better now to structure things, because the minister was talking in the morning about the regional SOC, for example, which just makes sense. But regional SOC, it's very difficult to build. We don't have funds to do it at regional level. Even at the SELEC level, we wanted to do a regional CERT. We have not been able to do it until now. So measures to support us, maybe to do a cluster of activities around these things, would help us to grow and get capacity, get more resources, human, first. And then from there, when the situation gets better, we could then go into the next stage, which is real setup. So I appeal to Cyber4D and the EU.
Thanks for that. We'll see what we can do. But now back to Andy. So how do you solve this this question of making this journey towards cyber resilience, appealing for politicians to pay attention and to put their money in it, or not their money but our money?
Yeah, this is obviously a perennial problem that we face, trying to convince leadership, and politicians that this is something they need to invest in. And I think, it's a bit like insurance. You're paying for something that is not really visible. And if it prevents a problem happening, you then get the question, well, we paid this money and nothing happened, But I really like Miller's, view on it being gardening. It is definitely two sides of one coin. To do any form of digital cyber development, you need to have the security around it. The analogies we've heard about, the environmental things that we have to protect against. I think that's probably one way, a really good way of trying to explain this issue in a non-technical way. But, it is difficult to put that spin on it. I think we should try and make it positive rather than negative. It is very easy to sell the benefit of cybersecurity when you've just had a ransomware attack or a big event in a nation. Unfortunately, that's often what happens. The reality doesn't dawn until you've got a substantial problem on your hands. And then, you're spending tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to fix a problem that could have been fixed for a fraction of that. So it is a bit like an insurance policy, but I really like these analogies, and I think that we should definitely give this some thought, and I know people have, on how we sell this and how we approach it.
Thanks. Merle, back to you.
Adding to that, I think ultimately it is one of the key questions ultimately, of course, because how do you make the politicians realize that cybersecurity is something important? I think it sort of is when these building blocks connect them, get connected, and where the cyber governance and political will is very connected to the awareness raising, because you need to do some awareness raising among the political leadership, but you also need to do the awareness raising among the general public, because if there is a public demand for more cybersecurity, the politicians clearly who are eager to walk where the votes are and would follow. I think insurance is a good way, but also speaking from an Estonian experience, I think that it is important not to let any good crisis go to waste. So whenever there happens, God forbid, but if some larger type of cyber attack or cyber crisis sort of hits the country, then it is very important, provided you survive after the crisis immediately, to not let it go to waste, but to try to set in immediate lessons learned and try to then make sure that you invest into the areas that ultimately, whatever has hit you, builds you stronger. in that regards, crisis need not hit your own country immediately, but close neighbors also. It's kind of like lightning that can hit close to home, so that it resonates. Because ultimately, I mean, from the position of the politicians, there's a demand to spend money everywhere. It's kind of like putting out fires all the time. So it is important to use the momentum to make the people in the top leadership to understand whenever sort of like some sort of ransomware or cyber attack is hitting close.
So back to our hosts. So I think, Rajesh, you haven't had such a moment where you can actually use any big incident and you know get complete new level of resources into your system.
God forbid we don't get it. Right? But I think it's not waiting for the disaster to come, then you look for that and paint the picture and get funds. I think this is a very horror movie type of scenario. We do not want this. We want a comedy type of scenario. So if we want that comedy type of scenario, we need to continue to build solutions. I think politicians are looking at what is going to be helpful for their citizens. I think this is where the currency is. So we need to continue in that road, but we need to also then explain to them, take the time, explain, and continuously explain that we are doing this, but we need to do certain security measures. Like, for example, if you have one data center and you're putting all your, and the metaphor would be putting all your eggs in one basket. When the basket falls, all the eggs get cracked. So you try to explain to them that disaster recovery is very important. You explain to them that we need backup solutions, because if we don't do that, then if this happens, this is what. So there is a lot of education that has to be done. We do not. We have to take the pain of doing that. But I think this is a safer way of doing things. But it takes time. It takes a lot of convincing to be done. And also, it's not just the politician from your side. It's also the politician holding the purse. And they will tell you whether they can give you for this year, they can't give you that year. So it's a long process. Government business is a long business. It's a complex business. But we manage to make progress. Slowly, but I would like to have faster progress. But it's usually slowly, but we do make progress.
Thank you very much. Now, as I know that we are pressed on time, I wanted to throw now the opportunity to the audience. I know at least I was mentioned at least 2 people who wanted to ask questions earlier. So as we didn't give opportunity and we have some of the speakers still here, so we have the opportunity to ask questions now. So can I have the mics passed around? I think Jean-Robert there had a question already earlier. Jean-Robert.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you. My question is to all of the panelists, whoever feel comfortable to respond. Have you ever seen, or do you have in the different measurement that you use, a set of how do I call it? A set of metric that can allow a country to understand the state of maturity of each critical sector. That's one. And the second that is directly related to that is that within the metric, in case they exist, do you have some components that allow also the country to measure the level of cross-sector cooperation? Thank you.
So anybody? Merle?
Well, I can try on that. Based on the National Cybersecurity Index that the Governance Academy does, which is publicly available at www.ncsi.ega.ee, we have indeed worked out an index whereby countries get credits to these building blocks of national cybersecurity resilience. The focus of the methodology is on the measurable aspects of cybersecurity implemented by the central government. Such aspects are, for example, the legislation, the existing units, the cooperation formats, or the outcomes. But having said that, I admit that ultimately with this metrics of the e-Governance Academy, as well as with the other metrics, if you want to have them universal, if one wants to make them on publicly available sources, which is very much the principle of the e-Governance Academy, then as long as you cannot complement them with in-quality interviews and questions to really look into, for example, not just whether a country has a legislation, but how well the implementation goes, for example. As long as you cannot add that quality dimension to it, all these metrics remain a bit rigid, and ultimately, I personally do not recommend countries to look very much at the listing of it, but rather to look at the building blocks as such, which can be an important sort of direction in the road towards more cybersecure status. Metrics, but of course metrics is good in politics and in everywhere when you need to compare with each other.
Any more thoughts from for this question? Laban, maybe?
I can try. Metrics are usually attached to a particular objective, and countries have specific objectives depending on the area that they are wanting to focus on. So the development of metrics is very much something they have to do. One of the findings that we have in our study was that metrics were inexistent. I say inexistent. Most countries do not have metrics, and when they do have them, they do not actually use them in the sense that it's either they do not run the assessment programs to make sure that things are happening the way they want them to happen. And also, beyond just the number of a particular metric, there is also the narrative that has to be attached to it, in the sense that you have to be able to assess the quality of it. It's, for instance, it's good that people will have 20 assessment happening, but now, how good was the assessment? Who did the assessment? Was anything new appearing in the assessment, which was not part of, for instance, the metric that was being put in place? So it creates that particular thing where the entity that has to assess needs to be the one that knows a bit better what type of objective they want to achieve in a particular area, a critical infrastructure area. So, yep. And talking about measuring collaboration, it comes down to the same thing where you have formal, informal, and other type of collaboration. It's good to have them happening, but to know the content, it is not like you have to be sending a report every week, and every week you type a report and email, and it comes back, and you say, so there needs to be also some understanding of the type of relationship that is going on, if it is creating a better environment or it is separating, let's say, the actors within that particular environment. And all of it is not going to be in terms of the numbers, but also in terms of the stories that tell you about what is going on in the environment. Thanks.
Thank you. We have another question over there. Please introduce yourself as well.
Yes, thank you so much. I have one question regarding how do you get the whole country to move along with cybersecurity? Like, for example, from where we come from, cybersecurity is not necessarily regarded so important. How do you get the country moving towards security as, cybersecurity, as cybersecurity is seen as a budget-hungry, I would say, project without any inputs, without any outcomes. So, and also we can't wait for a major incident to happen, because after the major incident, in fact, we've had, I would say, somehow major incidents, but after post the major incidents, they go back to forgetting about them. So how do we get them to invest in cybersecurity and understand that cybersecurity is quite a concern? Thank you.
Probably to our hosts.
My name is Mafuko Lebogang, and I'm from BWZ, Botswana.
Good. I think this is an interesting question, because what you're saying is that how do we get cybersecurity on the map? And because it is very much budget hungry and all. I think one of the things that have helped us to get cybersecurity on the map also in Mauritius is that we have tools, for example, to report issues. If, for example, you have had a phishing attack, you go into Mokos, you can report that you have this problem. You had a problem of fake profile, you had a problem of, say, extortion, of any other issue, you could report it on Mokos. I think this platform where people can complain, can explain what is the issue that they have had, has given visibility to the cybersecurity events. And when it has given visibility, and one, we've seen stories, and then you said storytelling, you could understand there's a story behind it, this is what has happened. One, second, you start to have numbers, because CERT gives you the number of complaints in this category, that category. Over a few months, you start to see figures. It starts to talk to you, because now you start to realize that this problem is not just a book style thing that is written in books, and it's not, we're not living through. So when we start to see the picture, we start to hear the numbers, this is where it becomes it rises in level as a government issue. And when it rises in level, then the government, the ministry, and everybody starts to think about it, and they say, okay, we need to tackle it. So actions start to take shape because there's visibility. I think first step would be to have a means to report. Because if there is no means to report, there is no visibility, nobody knows what it is. So first step with this, then from there it will take its own way forward.
Over there.
Can I make 3 questions? Is it allowed?
One only.
Only one. I'm going to make it longer then. Anton Dimni, monitoring and evaluation expert of Cyber4Devb. Pleasure to be with you here. Most of the comments are linked to the budget. So how much we, the state, should support cyber resilience. Then the question is it linked to Dr. Bangui findings, but also in terms of international best practices. Is there a percentage of the state budget that you recommend, or more or less a range from X% to Y%, to be allocated to cybersecurity in a particular country? And linked to this, who should pay the costs for cybersecurity? The state or the private companies as well? Because if I was, and I am, a simple taxpayer, I don't want my money to be spent to protect big companies' losses from cyber attacks. So I should wait. I would like to have them pay for their cybersecurity instead of taxpayers paying for companies' security. Also, for the STO of Mauritius, is there a deadline more or less when the committee is going to be established? I mean, to be operational, because I know it's established, but to be operational? I just made only one question.
So, one answer.
Okay. I will try to do. He will answer the second part of the question.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, so countries have different major priorities. In Africa, especially in SADC, you have countries who have very, very dire economic situation. So even talking about buying a server that will be, for some countries it will be just a line, but that will represent a significant size in the budget of that country. But not all countries have data centers. When I say data centers, the type that you can imagine, not 20 computers in a room. So the problem there is that problem of priority, to be able to put a budgeted number there. Other countries who have more resources, who have programs running that are dealing with many of the issues they are facing, they have a bit of space, and they can then start thinking about the percentage of the budget which they could allocate for cybersecurity. But the countries which do not have that kind of leverage, basically, because cybersecurity is touching all aspects of life in society, they will basically say it must fall under, let's say, the Ministry of Communication budget. And it must stay there. It shouldn't come anywhere in the Ministry of Finance or in the Ministry of Disaster Management or something like that. So they can't do it because all the resources, for instance, if it's for the Health Ministry, are dedicated to buying resources, paying the doctors and all of that. And now you're telling them they also have to pay a very expensive expert and a lot of equipment and do other things instead of dealing with that. That's a very difficult choice for them. And it will be a little bit presumptuous for any of us to try to tell them the entire budget of the country should take 2% of it and make it cybersecurity. That will be like, I don't know, it will be difficult to sell it like that. However, like I was suggesting, the countries that have more resources will be able to start thinking of it. When I say thinking, because telling anyone to take a percentage, specific percentage of a budget and to allocate it for, it's asking for a lot of thinking first, a lot of political engagement, and before you get there, we have spoken about 10 years, 20 years, and then you have an agreement and 2%, 5% could be allocated. So I will use a little bit what the director said earlier. There is a need for a lot of help and a lot of assistance, especially in the countries without the resources to develop these things. They need the money, they need the expertise, they need all of it to come to them because they cannot develop them because they are busy developing the other things. So that's for the first part of the question. So I'll leave the second part. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So let me go back to another take on the first part of the question. I think budget in a country would depend on priorities. I think this is rightly said. In government in Mauritius, ICT takes about 1% of government budget. 1%. Less than 1%, in fact, it is. Because we've got a lot of priorities. So the funds are not available for more than that. We cannot do otherwise. So cybersecurity would be a fraction of it. Now, I think the road that we're taking with the element of this National Cybersecurity Committee telling you that critical sector company organizations would have to give you an IT security audit is going to transfer some of the responsibilities on the company. So it's not going to be limited to any government business. Government has a role to play, definitely. It has to lead, and this is what it does. But the private sector would also have to do their share. Right? So I think things will evolve as we progress, and it's going to make a more sensitized environment in the country about cybersecurity, whether it is government, public, or it's private sector. This is one. Second, the National Cybersecurity Committee, I understand, is almost done in its composition. A couple of positions are left to be filled. A couple of positions would take short time So we are very close to the operationalization. I'm also waiting for that because I believe there's a lot of responsibility that the committee has to take, and the committee will then show us the way forward. A lot of things will get going once the committee is in operation. So we are very much close to starting.
And I think we have now very little time for the last question from over there. Okay. But we will have this last question, and then we close this panel.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Loreno Shaman. I'm from Mozambique, from the ICT regulator. In fact, I have the same situation. I had 3 minor questions. I'll try to put them together in one question. The first aspect is related to the topic of this conference, that we are working in building cyber resilience in African countries. But from our studies in Mozambique, we found out that many developments in the IT industry, many related to cloud computing, is leading to take data of the African citizens to other jurisdictions. How can we build resilience in cybersecurity within this context? The second aspect is to do with internet, how can I call it? The internet critical resources. I don't know other African countries. The study that we're doing in Mozambique is that many African countries are not able to establish and run their internet registries in their own countries. They rely on a company providing outside. And sometimes even some have problems in running their DNS. And we believe that the internet infrastructure is a principal component of building cyber resilience. How can we handle this if we are not able to do? The last point has to do with the global social platforms being run by global internet companies. How can you build resilience in African countries when there are no legal and regulatory, global legal and regulatory frameworks to govern the global players, and we are talking and discussing of setting up national legal and regulatory environments? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the last part of your question would deserve another conference. So I will just leave it at this very interesting question on the cloud platforms. Maybe Rajneesh, you have good formula from Mauritius?
Yes, for us, we have the Governmental Land Center, which is our own data center, government data center, and it runs a private cloud for government. And in Mauritius, the concept is that whenever it's citizen data, it does not leave government data center and it does not leave the country. So question doesn't arise to go in the public cloud outside the country, no question. Because we're going to get a lot of trouble with the citizens on that. This personal data stays in our cloud and it is our government cloud. So I think this is where we can set up, any SADC countries can set up their own private clouds, government-run private clouds that serve their countries. Or it could even, just an idea like that, it could even be a SADC-wide private cloud that is run, for example, from Mauritius, and that we would, because our laws, we do not have a cloud act here. So you don't have to be fearful that some country would come in and see what you have. We would not even see what you have. So you have the trust that you can keep it here, and we've got a very robust data protection act taken from very much aligned with the GDPR, so EU's GDPR. So we have all the legal instruments in place that we could serve. And today we've got 3 cables, submarine cables. We're going to have fourth one by next year. So we are very much a country where you have all the facilities so that we could serve the SADC region. So please set up the cloud at your level, or if you need our help, we would be so happy to do it. This is question 1. Question 2, I lost it. What was that?
Well, I think we will have to close the panel now because we have had such a intensive and interesting discussion. I think all our panelists would deserve a strong hand from our audience. And thank you very much for everybody for participating. And I think our next panel is already lined up and waiting. Thank you. So next one up, we have a very distinguished panel, which is moderated by my fellow colleague in Cyber Resilience for Development from Botswana, Mr. Nick Small. So I'll let you introduce the panel and go on from here.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing me as being from Botswana. I'm very proud of that. Ronald was just speaking with me earlier and did mention something about an honorary citizenship. So I'm proud that that's now absolutely official. So anyway, good evening. Good evening. It may feel like good evening for some of you, but anyway, good afternoon, everybody. I think we have this afternoon a very, well, I know we have a very distinguished panel, and we have a very interesting topic to speak on, which is one that I think we keep touching on in these sessions. Some of the questions in our earlier panel really talked to the subject that we're now going to discuss, and that is about communications and collaboration, cyber communications and collaboration in Africa. And obviously, that is a topic that could in of itself fill an entire conference. So, but we will try and condense our comments and hopefully field some questions from the audience over the next 45 minutes or so. Rather than introduce each one of our panel, because they are such the distinguished panel, I would fill the 45 minutes just telling you about my colleagues here, and then unfortunately we'd have to end. So instead, what I'm going to ask is for each one of the panel to introduce themselves and give an initial opening remarks and comments, and then we'll get into a bit more of a free-flowing discussion. Now, we're very fortunate to have with us live from Abidjan, I believe, this afternoon, Omo Awaya, and I think we will turn the floor over to Omo first, because I think he has some pressing business in Abidjan. So, Omo, without further ado, I will turn it over to you, and if you'd like to introduce yourself to the audience here and maybe give us your initial comments and thoughts about cyber communications and collaboration in Africa. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yes, I do have some. We're in the middle of the WACRAN annual conference, so yes, it's a bit hectic, but I'm really pleased that I could make the time to join. I hope you can hear me clearly. And I can see very familiar faces in your panel. So yes, you're right. This is a topic dear to our heart. So for just a bit of an introduction. So I work for the West and Central African Research and Education Network, and that is WACRAN, what I just mentioned. So the as a background, because this is a slightly different community, the higher education and research in Africa is broken into 3 regions. So there's the Western Central African region, the East and South African, and the North African region. So over the course of the last 12 to 15 years, we have been building a research network across Africa. Those that are familiar with the construct in other continents are familiar with NRENs, National Research Education Networks. At the moment, we have been engaged in a project called Africa Connect. This is the third iteration. And at the moment, we have connected 38 of the 38 countries in the region, in Africa. So along the line, we had this obvious challenge. As we were building the networks, securing the networks was on the front burner, and there have been several attempts to establish our own sort of form of cyber resilience in these research networks. So we have worked with the colleagues at different stages of this evolution. At one point in time, we were looking at how we could establish security teams and grow them so that we could have enough support in the different networks. At another time, we sort of identified that we needed information. So we looked at threat intelligence platforms. So what this has all come together into, so that I don't take too much time, is the establishment of a cooperation platform for the CSETs in research networks. But when we started to think about how we were going to do this, we consulted with some of the members of this panel and other colleagues in Africa about being able to leverage the infrastructure that we were building, which was sort of akin to what our colleagues in Europe had done, because in Europe there's an organization called TFCZ that everybody's probably very familiar with. But then there are also our sister regional network in Europe, GÉANT, which sort of connects 32 countries, is also sort of directly connected with this structure. So rather than reinvent the wheel, and since we're already partners with GÉANT in Africa Connect and in other projects, we sought to leverage some of the successes in Europe and replicate them in Africa. So what we have done is established a platform called Trust Broker Africa. So this is it was initially sort of supported by the 3 regional RENs. Africa Search has been consulted. We have built a platform which is similar to what exists in Europe. It's called Trusted Introducer in Europe. It's called Trust Broker Africa in Africa. So this is a cooperation platform for CSETs. It allows CSETs to list their members. It allows for CSETs to communicate securely and privately, and has an accreditation platform that's connected to the capacity building we're involved in. So at the early stages, CSETs are listed, but as they mature, they get accredited, and this is done within the community. So we're in the process of establishing robust community governance. So I am really pleased to be here. I think that's enough of an introduction for now.
Thank you, Omo. And thank you for that overview of not just WACREN and the work that has gone on over many years now, but also you introduced the subject of creating those linkages between CSERTs across the continent and the establishment of Trust Broker Africa. I guess, and I'll now bring in the rest of our panelists here on that subject. I mean, is this not, one of those difficult nuts to crack, so to speak, in the sense of creating the linkages? And I think many of us talk about building trust, and just looking at the name that we're applying here, Trust Broker Africa, building those trust relationships between CSERTs so that they can confidently communicate, share information, and engage with their colleagues across the region, but also across the continent. Is is that one of the core challenges that we face when we speak specifically about cybersecurity and the incident response capabilities, so the CSIRT communities? Is it that building of trust that needs to take place to be able to create a framework that supports collaboration and cooperation? And obviously here we're talking about specifically within the incident response community, if you will. Don, would you want to start us off with a comment on that?
Didn't you want to do the introductions?
Oh, yes. Well, maybe, yes, introduce yourself. I take it for granted everybody knows who you are, but anyway, yes. Well, if you introduce yourself and then maybe respond to that point.
Well, I can be short. Don Stickford here on behalf of Cyber4Devb. And I have been active in, well, Internet pioneer and cybersecurity pioneer since 1989. So that's some time ago. And specifically also the last, well, since 1993 actually, we were building in Europe cooperation of CSIRTs. I've done that very much internationally the past 20 years. The past 10 years I've been many times in Africa, also for instance invited by Jean Robert. Actually I gave a keynote here on Mauritius once in a conference, as you probably remember. And I actually had the honor that Jean Robert told me earlier today that I'm, in his eyes, an honorary member of the African cybersecurity community. So, Nick, we are both, what's the word for that? Enlisted. Shall I comment more now?
Yes, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, okay. So, what I did very much personally, together with colleagues and friends, several of them have become friends over the years, is that in 1993 we started talking about cooperation. Well, in Europe we started with internet pretty early, right? So we were a little bit in advance of other regions on the planet. Anyway, it doesn't really matter because the problem is the same. Only these challenges have become bigger right now. In 2022 we have much bigger challenges than we had in 1993. It's hard to imagine even. And the problem is the same. What do you need when you actually want to solve cybersecurity problems? Well, apart from all the high-level things like strategies, you need people who talk with one another to solve the problems. So you basically need people, combinations of people called teams, CSIRTs, whatever names they have, SOCs, ISACs, all this kind of teams who together make up the cybersecurity framework worldwide need to talk with one another. And for that, it is not just enough to have a few business cards that you collected in a conference. You actually need teams that establish a relationship with each other. These teams need to know each other. They need to know what trusted email addresses to use. They need to know what phone numbers to use. They need to maybe use something technical called PGP keys to be able to send things in a confidential, encrypted way to other teams if it's very sensitive information. All that kind of things need to be established. Well, we had a long history of doing that in Europe, and this kind of thing has happened all over the world. Africa CERT has already done a lot of those things. But I think there are still some ways to go here on the African continent. By the way, also in Europe, we are by far not ready yet with this development. And the way to do that is really not so hard, but you got to do it. You got to get these teams together. You got to establish these contacts, make sure there is some kind of trust relationship, and you can do that in ways like, for instance, Jean Robert and Africa sort of been doing. You can do that with an initiative like Trust Broker Africa that Omo has been describing. But the most important thing is that this kind of action is taken, because it's not enough to have strategies. It's not enough to have policies. You need to actually have teams who know each other and who have trusted relationship with each other. Like you already said, Nick, trust is the basis for worldwide collaboration on cybersecurity incidents and threats. Without trust, you don't get anywhere. And trust cannot be established. By the way, yeah, trust cannot be established online. One of these challenges we've had in the past corona crisis. Trust is established in meetings like this and also in technical meetings by getting together and actually getting to know people. Having dinner together, drinking a glass of orange juice or something more spiritual together. This kind of thing is essential to build trust. And I think I'll stop there and pass on to Jean-Robert.
Okay, thank you, Don. My name is Jean-Robert Ntome from Africa Cert. I think that I will add a little bit also on just what Don said, but also bring us some perspective from the African continent. And maybe if we have a second round, I can add a little bit to that. So we have different stakeholders within the continent. We have national teams, we have REN teams, we have teams in different settings, like for example, the Internet Exchange. They have built their communities, and each of those different organizations have their way of coordination and talking within each other. So how can we bring all those different entities with different framework together to ensure that they are able to talk in a certain way, in a trusted way within one another? That's one thing. The second thing that we have also seen outside of the different existing framework and how to build the bridge between those different existing organization and existing framework is the concept of teams. What do we call teams? Teams in Europe or in the general incident response communities mean specific things, specific requirements that are there. But in the African context, we have some countries who don't have any CSIRT. Do we want to include them into existing framework? How do we do that? How do we talk to them? Who do we identify so that bringing those people within an existing platform where there is already a level of trust established and people used to talk to each other don't undermine the whole community? How do we reach out to existing entity that we need to talk to, but we cannot classify them in the existing framework that exists? So it brings out different kind of issue that we have been trying to brainstorm around and solve over the year, and it is not an easy one. So yeah, I agree with you, Don, that we need, and especially that maybe the pandemic maybe is far from us now. We need to find a way to get in touch with one another more often, for people to be able to know each other, to know the level of, so we talk about trust, but I like to add the terms of trustworthiness. I want to be able, if I give you my information before we get into a platform to talk, to discuss, I want to be able to be sure that whatever I tell you to do with that information, you do that with that information and you don't do something else. So how do we build that kind of personal trustworthiness before getting within one another to speak? The other things that has come often when through the Africa Cert platform and also when talking to one another is, if I trust CertMU and you trust CertMU, does it mean that I trust you? So those are a couple of not difficult, but things that have to be put in place so that we can move forward to build that global trust relationship, or even that trust relationship that we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
My name is Lorino Sheman. I'm currently the chairman of the ICT regulator in Mozambique. That's the entity tasked by the government also to work as the cybersecurity authority. We do run the CSAP, but beside that, I also work as a professor at the Eduardo Mondlane University in Mozambique in the ICT field and specifically in the cybersecurity. For the topic that we are addressing today, we are observing and addressing it from the policy point of view. We had our policy and national cybersecurity strategy approved last year, and one of the dimensions that's included as part of cybersecurity strategy is related to international cooperation and collaboration, because it's our understanding that you cannot address cybersecurity issues and challenges by yourself as a country because of the nature of the cyberspace and the global. So this is the starting point, and we are now in a process of establishing our national cybersecurity ecosystem that will be composed of sectoral CSER, institutional CSER, that will communicate, and within this national context, we can even approve regulatory framework that can enforce that communication collaboration. But the challenge that we're facing, and I would like to learn here in this conference, how do you establish the same level of communication with your international partner or stakeholders? Because you cannot put a decree or a regulatory framework to do that, because it's part of other jurisdiction, but you have to cooperate and work with this partner in terms of sharing information, operational information, getting support when you are facing difficulties related to cybersecurity. Because we cannot influence from the policy level or the legal level, what we're trying is to look for an initiative internationally, like the Africa CERT within Africa, and the European trust entity that we went through a process, and the Mozambique Research and Education Network, CSERT, has been approved to be part of, and we are also part of Africa CSERT. So this is the process that we are approaching. But the challenge that I would like to present for the debate today is how do you handle that when you are dealing with official communication within government? And this when it comes when you are addressing national cybersecurity entities like national CSET, because this sometimes can require even communication at the diplomatic level. How can you address this? And really, this is one of the challenges that we're having, and we are trying to have initiative of sensitization, training of Minister of Foreign Affairs and even diplomats to be aware of the importance of cybersecurity so that they can help out communicate at that level, but also at operational, as Don was mentioning, reaching out to national teams in other countries or in academia where we can operationally exchange and share this information. We don't believe that this is the perfect model, but at least this is what we're following. And what we are facing as challenge is that we have to do it on a bilateral basis. And it would be good if we had a kind of a regional platform within, for example, SADC region or within Africa that we can use for that purpose. And also these regional bodies have connection with their peers at the international level in Europe, America, and Asia, so that the communication is really reaching all the corners, so that because some of the attacks that we're resisting in our country are perpetrated by individuals or organizations in other parts of the world, even in other continents. Without this kind of support and collaboration, it would be difficult to address those difficulties or concerns, and even fight against some of the cybercrime or cyber attacks that we are facing. This would be my initial comments. And thank Omo for this initial comments. It's part of the work that we started for 4 years as part of NREN's community on how to build a community for the cybersecurity. And we are part of that process and will be engaging to try to contribute and support this Trust Broker Africa initiative. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. I mean, I think the immediate comments here underlined some of the challenges that we face in trying to develop, you know, whatever term we want to use, a network, a means for the right type of cooperation and collaboration across the continent, and then we even have to discuss that from a regional basis. But first, let me just go back to Omo. Omo, listening to your fellow panelists, is there anything specifically that you heard there that you want to touch on?
I think the three colleagues sort of have synced on the need for operational and sharing of operational information. But the challenges that Jean-Robert and Lorenas have highlighted are some that are common to any sort of platform or any need to have distinct separate communities with common goals interact with each other. So yes, another thing was that, yes, we do need bilateral communication. But what I would like to add here is that what we also need is some way where we can identify, even before we actually communicate, identify who we would like to communicate with. I'm speaking from the experience of, like Lorena mentioned, from the NRENs, and then from the fact that as national structures, research academic structures, we have as part of Trust Broker Africa, we have been connecting with the national CSETs in the same space. And now we're still early stage, but we're already making significant progress. Africa has actually assisted, like in the country I am currently in, Cote d'Ivoire, we have an improved relationship with the CSET here, the national CERT. So again, like Don mentioned, some of this trust is built by having a drink with the person, being in close proximity to actually build that trust. So there are two parts to this. One is, we do need to identify each other. So that means we have to have something that scales and beyond the shores of Africa. One of the interests in when we were establishing Trust Broker Africa was to be able to exchange information like this with other world regions. So by sharing similar systems that can interface with each other and share information securely, we sort of achieved that, or at least work towards achieving that. And then by being able to identify these other communities in close geographical proximity to you, then you're able to reach out to start to build that trust or engage in activities that can build capacity, like Lorena was mentioning. And I think that kind of capacity could be specific to a particular community. It could be a more general type of capacity building where all the communities could partake in it. But these baby steps are necessary to sort of break down the silos in which we exist.
Thank you, Omar. I think that last comment you made there about baby steps kind of leads me to the next point that I wanted to raise with the panel. When we talk about collaboration and cooperation inside Africa, we obviously have to recognize that we are talking about a very large, a very diverse, and several of the panelists have already pointed out that the position with regard to cybersecurity and capacity development in this area differs dramatically between nations and between certain environments. So, as a hypothesis, would it be fair to say that regional cooperation and collaboration and without immediately aligning with existing regional bodies, if we ignore those for a second, if you will, and we don't talk SADC and EAC and ECOWAS and so forth, would it be an approach, or would it be viable to start from a basis where cooperation and collaboration at first focuses very much on a geographic region, in the sense that You know, for instance, you know, everybody here today, we are, you know, we're here representing a portion of the continent. I think between nations represented within the audience here today, there are already strong ties. There are already some of those personal relationships. Does it need, and maybe, Omar, I'm stealing your term and now turning it into something else, but in a sense, do those baby steps need to start with immediate neighbors or countries where there are, either from a social or society reason or for economic reasons, there are already relationships in place? Would that help build a path towards, you know, communications and cooperation across the continent, e.g. start small, or start in sections, if you will? Or is that, would that in fact then just complicate the process of trying to build out a strong network and capacity to communicate across the continent? And I'll open that up to anybody who wants to. And please do disagree with me.
I would like to use the word of Professor. I think there are things that are happening and it is possible. For example, Professor mentioned a bilateral relationship. For what we have seen, for example, is countries, and that is why I ask about the concept of transitive trust, if that's something that can be looked at. For example, we have countries that have been establishing a kind of transitive, a kind of bilateral relationship within one another or within each other. We have seen cases, for example, with some of those countries introducing countries with whom they already have some bilateral relationship within the network. So that's one interesting step. The second step that we have seen is, and thanks for Karim and Mauritius third, is countries that even during the pandemic have been used to organize themselves or organize kind of working group or team to build on activities, like for example, being able to organize a drill together or different kind of activities, or being able to collaborate within a working group on a specific topic. It can even just be a country organizing a training and inviting all the other countries or some countries that they are already in relationship to participate to that training. We have seen those countries inviting those peers to join the network, or those countries that have been participating in drill together, having a level of confidence within one another, being able to reach out to those countries and say, hey, I know you, I know your capability, I know your skills, I know so and so on in a team. There is this kind of organization or this kind of platform where you can be in touch with other teams that are within the region or even outside the region would like to join that platform. So we have seen that. Another type of collaboration, but also a sensibilization of teams to join those kind of platform, is through fellowship. We've seen, for example, countries that, because they have a certain level of maturity, they have been inviting other countries, or some other countries have been visiting them to see their level of organization or how they perform their activities and etc. Acting like some kind of mentor with those other teams that they have been working with and kind of vouching for them to join kind of existing platform, and also being kind of quote-unquote mentor of those teams along their journey, their collaboration journey within those platforms. So I think that we have a couple of initiatives here and there that we can think about putting together to achieve that level of cooperation, trust building mechanism that we want within the continent. I don't know if you want to add something, Don.
Thank you. Yes, let me think. Yes, a lot of you will probably know this, but for those who may not, I will first say that there is no way that on the internet, and I'm talking worldwide now, which obviously is also in Africa, there's no way that there is some kind of hierarchical system by which you can solve these things. Why? Because the internet does not have a clear hierarchy, which is basically based on the fact how it came about, but also on its technical merits. I mean, it's a too long story to go into that. But the internet doesn't have a strict hierarchy. The cybersecurity community, as a result, also does not have a strict hierarchy. So a hierarchical solution doesn't exist. Is that bad? Well, maybe decades ago I thought it was, but I actually changed my mind, because what I see is that there are other ways of doing it, and I've learned that in the past 30 years. And what we've built globally, and in Africa, is a system where you have a combination of, let's say, hierarchical relationships and free-form relationships. And you were asking about that, Nick and Jean-Robert, you were also talking about some of those. So let's first start inside your country. Inside your country, take, for instance, Mauritius. We've been talking about Mauritius a lot, of course. But it goes for any country. It's really important to build a stakeholder network, sometimes called a CSIRT network, if you talk about incident management, incident response specifically. So you need to make sure that not only the government, but also the national team, other parts of the government, the military, law enforcement, but also the private companies, civil society, etc., that they're all a member of this CSIRT network. So that's the stakeholder network which you very much need inside your country. You need to have cooperation on incidents and threats. Then you need to reach out. And it is not just the national network, the national CSIRT that reaches out. It's usually also a few other big stakeholders in the country that reach out. It's up to them, because there's nobody telling you whether or not to cooperate outside your country. You can, at least in democracies, you can just do that. And that means that the global community is quite complicated. If you look at the worldwide level, there are some important organizations like FIRST, Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. And for instance, Jean-Robert and I are both a member, which is a really important party that brings a lot of teams together, especially also most national teams that are around now. The membership of FIRST is still growing, but also lots of other teams in the commercial sector, in the critical infrastructure sector, etc. That's worldwide. And then you asked, should you have a specific regional cooperation? Well, you know, the big advantage of doing some things regionally is that it's simply simpler to organize. Travels are shorter, cheaper. You also have usually some cultural similarities, though indeed, I mean, I know Europe very well. Europe is complex. Africa is at least as complex and a lot bigger. But still, there is certainly a case for regional cooperation. There is regional cooperation in Africa, but I'm quite sure that this could even be more hands-on, so that indeed all the teams, which is work, like I already said, that for instance Jean-Robert has been working on for many years, it's easier for those teams to reach out together to reach each other and actually work on incidents based on that trust that you also mentioned, which is essential. Then you can do things like, which was in your question, Nick. You can have special relationships with teams that you have a reason to have such a relationship with. For instance, neighboring countries. But it can also be a country that is not quite neighboring you, but for whatever reason you have a special relationship with. Or companies have a relationship with each other. And then very often what you see is that CSIRTs, for instance, have the construct of MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding, to work together. That's a quite common mechanism. And you know, if I'm painting this picture, what you see is that, for instance, if you're a national CSIRT, take the national CSIRT of Mauritius. You have a number of countries, a number of national CSIRTs that you have a special relationship with. So sometimes it's useful to lay that down in MOUs. Then you have things like first membership, membership of Africa CERT, working together with Trust Broker Africa. It's quite a complicated picture. There is no simple solution. But it is really important to engage in all these kind of relationships to make sure that at the end of the day, and that's what it's all about, if there is an incident here on Mauritius, and Kalim and his team start looking into the packets, because that's what it is at the end of the day, right? And you see that it seems to come from Brazil, just as an arbitrary country. Then you want to get in touch with people in Brazil who you can actually trust to solve that problem. That's what incident management is all about. Or you want to get threat information from the Netherlands, for instance, my country. And the people in the Netherlands want to know who to send it to and if they can actually trust those people. That's what it's all about. And that means that you need to be able to rely on that whole network of international relationships with FIRST, Africa CERT, Trust Broker, TFC CERT, AP CERT in Asia Pacific, LACNIC in Latin America, OAS, I could go on. It's a complicated network, but to be a member of that and a part of that with your bilateral relationships, your memberships, is the way to solve this equation. It's complicated, but it's necessary. And well, actually, from Cyber4Devb, we're really happy to help with that. With that said, I think...
Thank you, Dom. Nick, also for this challenging question. What I would like to comment, adding to my colleague's initial reference, has to do with the contextual, what I usually call contextual variables of Africa. When it comes to communication collaboration. I totally agree with Don's reference to the free form of the internet and all, but bringing a little bit of our experience as a country and my individual participation to some of the African Forum, yes, we can start with loosely kind of related to formal grouping between countries to start the baby steps. But there will be a point where we'll have to change and try to use the formal and official channels when we are dealing with governments, because governments have own characteristics. And also, being in Africa, one of the dimensions that I would like to bring to the consideration is what I also call the Ubuntu spirit, which we can grow together. When you talk within a region, bringing all the countries within a region, besides sharing experience and connecting the teams, is to push the other countries that, as we mentioned in the previous session, are lagging behind because they're not aware or they've not been in contact. Bringing to a room like this and learning and listening to what's going on in other countries, maybe we can influence them to set up the teams and even to follow the steps. So it's an important dimension. Also, another aspect that was mentioned in the previous section is about funding. My experience on working for NREN's community, being part of Ubuntu Net Alliance that covers SADC and East Africa, is that we started as an informal grouping of individuals working in this field for years now. But when it started coming to approaching partners, formal partners in Europe, for example, the EU, the World Bank and other, it came as the question that it's important that you have a kind of stamp from the government in terms of communicating. And when you talk to that level, even at the regional level, so when you are asking for support, for financing, or even to influence the decision makers or the politician,
to include in their policies financing, for example, cybersecurity. In these informal groups, you have limitation, but when you are talking at this level of formal government meetings, where you meet the ministers, you meet the presidents, you can easily pass the message and get the message listened and be implemented. So I would defend more kind of a combination of both approach with the purpose of looking for the capacity building need for Africa, because this, as stated and very well by our colleagues from the University of Cape Town, most of African countries are at that stage, at initial stage where they need to learn from what's going on. So I would kind of leave this as my comments to that process, because I know many initiatives that failed because of lack of funding, because they were not appropriate channel of communication to reach the ministers, to reach the politician, and to include in the policy framework. For example, to include 1% funding. You can do it within a country, as Mauritius did here, but if Mauritius shared that with other ministers or the president, maybe they can learn from the positive impact of this measure and then include in their policies also. Thank you.
Professor Lorena, I think you touch on a very important point there, which is that we can talk about fostering and empowering communication and collaboration amongst incident response teams and so on and so forth. But we cannot overlook the fact that there must be, well, first of all, there must be communication and cooperation at a government level, at a more official level, and that when that's in place, that then empowers that communication, because often, to be blunt, we deal with bureaucracy and we deal with rules that restrict us from being able to maybe cooperate and collaborate the way we want to. I want to take just 1 second and do a very, very rude thing, which is I'm going to do an unapologetic plug for Cyber4Devb. And the reason I'm going to do this is we're here today, and we're one of the things we have done today is officially announced or launched CertMU as a hub for our initiative. And going back to Jean-Robert's comments about coordination and cooperation, you used the word fellowship, and I read that as the point being that building a relationship, building a trust relationship, sometimes takes more than just meeting in a conference room like this. It takes more than a day or two. It takes real engagement, and therefore my plug is that what we've announced today is hopefully a vehicle where countries and teams that are sitting here can consider how can we engage through CertMU to look for ways for more almost more long-term engagement and cooperation, not just let's have a phone call, but are there opportunities for secondment? And it may not necessarily mean everybody comes and invades Kalim's office, but ways to build more long-standing relationships between counterparts, which could be those types of assignments where specific individuals are given the opportunity to spend time alongside their counterpart. And we are hopeful that the Cyber4Devb program and initiative and the formation of the hub might give those types of opportunities to others. So anyway, sorry, I apologize, bit of a plug. I see I'm being maybe signaled that it's time for questions. Can I just ask, Omo, do you have anything, we've been talking here, is there anything that you'd like to respond to from what you've heard from, again, from the panelists?
Well, very quickly, if we are cut out for time. So the hub in Kalim's with ZMU is new to me because I haven't been able to follow the conference. I'm looking forward to understanding what that's about. I also wanted to speak just briefly about what Loreno had mentioned about basically having to build capacity and the learning we've had from not directly related to incident management, but this is open science. So what has happened recently, and part of the conference I'm in, is about connecting, the theme of the conference is open science in Africa, connecting the dots. So essentially the same sort of challenge. How do you bring people together to sort of, rise to this? Now, what had happened, and this is on a global basis, was that the UNESCO and the member countries had come up with a global recommendation on open science. So what we are starting to do in Africa and in other parts of the world is to take those global recommendations and the principles and actions and looking at ways to implement them. Now, what that is doing is bringing a consensus in thought and actions. So I'm sort of drawing parallels with what Lorena mentioned about, the need for some kind of structure on that level. The government, when government first of all appreciates and does a little bit more than speaks to the need in some concrete way. And then following on that, the ecosystem of teams and stakeholders can have a framework for collaboration that, these principles that we've discussed here are sort of ensconced in, and then we can start to build the connecting blocks.
Thank you, Omar. Yeah, I think I think there's a lot of unity in what's being said here. But I think we all sit here recognizing that it will remain a continuous challenge to build up cooperation and collaboration in the way that we need it. And I think as Omar, as you reiterated and as Professor Lorena had raised already, there are levels to this. We sometimes look at the the CSIR community and we see the communication and collaboration that is needed there, but we cannot overlook the fact that there has to be a supporting environment for that. So with that, should we see if there are any questions, or is everybody reached that point in their day where they
Nick, may I do a quick clarification?
Yes,
I promise that I will be very short. It's actually quite important because, as you just said, it's also very important to have top-down. And I was talking also quite a lot about bottom-up. The point is you actually absolutely need both. Because if you only have top-down, let's say from government level, then, for instance, you have private companies and universities, etc., who will say, well, it's nice that the government says that, but we're going to do our own thing. And then you end up with a non-working situation. On the other hand, if you only have bottom-up, that's also really nice. That's a very good initiative, but then you don't have governance. So it isn't cemented in. So you absolutely need both. You need a top-down approach together with a bottom-up approach. That's the most successful model.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Nick, I can, okay. Yeah, please go ahead. No, that's okay.
No, the thing that I was going to add to what Don just said is that also people, especially within specific network, change a lot every 6 months. I like to say that the TTL is 6 months. So what do we do when you establish a framework with a specific organization, and after 6 months, the person who was at the heart of this, that make the thing happen, is no longer there. So it came back to the engagement at a higher level so that there is a kind of continuity.
All right. Thank you, Nick. Maybe just one comment here, which I wanted to talk onto that. First of all, like we being Cyber4Devb have, definitely we will be able, or we will try our best to entertain as many requests we can have. And coming back to the collaboration, definitely we are working with a number of stakeholders right now. And something which I wanted to pinpoint, especially here once we are talking about the whole landscape of Africa, we are involved, we are seeing that what is most important here is that, of course, I mean, teams are connecting. And even Don has been talking, John has been talking, Professor has been talking, Omo has been talking. There are different teams, they are connecting to each other. But normally what we see and what I feel also that the country's top level commitment, and that has been mentioned. And this is what has been seen in Africa. If you look at Africa, the countries they are there where we have, let's say, a better commitment, those countries are even having a better collaboration between the different stakeholders in Africa, as well as they are collaborating with other teams around the world. So I think that's one point. And secondly, also, if we look at Africa, and maybe Don and John, the professor, they could add on to something. If we see Africa, there are different regional agencies as well. And though Africa CERT is doing a lot, even Omo's team is trying to have all these 21 national CSERT teams in Africa, those who are the part of it, plus even all other IXPs or RENs and other teams they are trying to communicate. But even I believe that these different agencies also, they have a role to play. And why? Because there are discussions at their level where their ministers of different states, they sit together. And once this goes on again from that level, because all these teams are trying, we are all trying, and we are having collaborations from other teams as well. But even if it disseminates and it drills down to, as Don was talking about, let's say, top-down approach. So if it is being taken at that level, and then from there also there is some sort of a commitment which comes back to the different countries, because even in Africa, if you see, every country has a different maturity level. And with accordingly to that maturity level, they start responding. So if you do not have that preparedness and maturity, you will not respond to the level further up. So I think that kind of a collaboration is also important, and Africa is working towards that, Nick, and because we're also different, these regional organizations, they are trying to talk to each other, they are trying to talk to Africa CERT, and then many others, they are trying to be the part of even first affiliation membership, and then so on. So I think one point taken is that all these, again, collaboration from the different regional agencies, they have to come together with all these who are leading the stakeholdership of building a trust into the whole region. Thank you.
Gentlemen, any comments to Kalim's point there?
Thank you for this element. I just wanted to make a short comment, and agreeing totally on what you just mentioned about the collaboration, what's going on in Africa. And to give an example, a kind of practical example of what's going on in this region, at least the SADC region, Mauritius and Mozambique and many SADC countries here, we are working with the SADC Secretariat in designing the regional cybersecurity strategy, and even discussion about setting up a kind of a regional CSERT. If, for example, can try to connect the initiative that was launched today here as part of Cyber4Devb and with the Secretariat, we can maybe easily reach out to all the SADC member states and even to those countries that are in the early stage to be aware and to start thinking on how to do that. And the beauty of this is that we can align these initiatives instead of having scattered initiatives that are not talking to each other. And this, for me, will be another dimension of communication and collaboration. For example, we in Mozambique, we are lucky because of our informal networks. We are part of the Cyber4Devb, we are part of GFC, we are part of the Africa CERT, we are part of FIRST, but not many countries are lucky to have this. But if we have gatherings like this where we can share this experience, other countries can learn and follow the footsteps of those who are ahead, like what I've learned this morning in Rwanda, in Kenya. So it would be important to have this dimension. Not only because of the nature of the cybersecurity, what we've been observing, and it's interesting, that I've been observing in Mozambique, is that you have areas, for example, agriculture, health, and other, where NGOs sometimes can fight governments. Where you have a separate kind of arrangement, hierarchical, that's normal for government entities. But in cyberspace, on cybersecurity, all this group must come together if we want to build a resilient sphere in the cyberspace where we're all secure and safe to make transactions for education, for health, for tourism, for all other social and economic activity. So we should construct frameworks that allow the participation of all others and governance structure that allow the contribution and participation for all other dimensions. Okay, thank you.
Excellent.
I would like to ask a little bit controversial things into the debate. And basically, it is from what you just said, Professor. So, again, the idea to have maybe a global platform or some different platform that come together to cooperate is where, in fact, we all want to go. However, we have to think about a couple of things also, and based on what you just said, think at the global level and go a little bit wider. So for example, in our framework, we have a collaboration with what we call the Internet Exchange Point in Africa. Not all of them have CSIRT teams, but at least in the secretariat of every exchange point, you can find somebody that can help you to coordinate with all the teams over there in case there is an incident. Do we want to include them into a global platform? Those are things that we have to think about in terms of framework. I will go a little bit further. Today I mentioned about the African technology makers. There are about 600 companies that have a kind of framework and platform where they speak to each other. We are there because we want them when they are thinking about application, but also when we find vulnerabilities, we want to communicate that through that platform to whoever use that component within the different software, different application that they are building. Do we want to bring all those people within a global platform, or how do we want to cooperate with them? In many teams in many institutions in Africa, for example, CCTLDs and others, you find only one person that is doing everything, and that is also in charge of security. Do we have, or do we want to bring that person into a kind of global platform, or do we want to keep the system in a way that we know how to reach out to those people wherever it is needed? So I think those are also some considerations that we have to brainstorm on that will guide, in fact, our position and how we want to frame the collaboration platform or the collaboration framework. Thank you.
Jean-Robert, I think what you've just raised is yet another conference. So now we've got 3 more conferences that we need. But we're lining them up thick and fast here. But no, very good comments and very good points. I'm afraid we've run out of time. And first of all, I just wanted to start by thanking Omo for bearing with us from Abidjan, and thank you for your contributions. That was very, very helpful, and we were very glad to have you here as a hybrid version of our panel. So thank you, Omar. Thank you to my other panelists. I think we probably leave the stage here with probably a few more questions than we created answers, but that is the pure nature of the subject that we're touching upon. And I think hopefully it'll stimulate some conversations tonight over dinner and so forth. So anyway, thank you all, and That is it for this afternoon, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you all, and this is indeed the end of today's sessions. The bus to the dinner leaves in half an hour, so get ready. And see you tomorrow.